Welcome everyone. Thanks for coming today to our first seminar of this year. We have a whole seminar series that runs throughout the first and second semester, so please come along. We've got some really interesting ones coming up, fashion and clean air, and some really interesting seminars. But today our topic is a really important one for all of us, which is finance. I think this is the first time we've had this topic in our seminar series, so I'm really interested to see what our speakers have to say. And we also have a question and answer session at the end, so you can answer some burning questions you have of the speakers. So today we've got three speakers. We've got Steve Dauncey, who's here in his role of Head of Finance for the University of Manchester, so welcome, Steve. We also have John Stageman here, who's welcome, John. You've come up from London, I understand, today, because he thinks this topic is so important to the university. So welcome. And you are a board member, and he's the chair of the investment subcommittee. So I'm sure he's been thinking about some of these issues for quite a while. Pardon? I'm worrying about these issues. Yeah, that's probably the better word for it, worrying about these issues for quite a while. Come in, don't worry, we're just starting. And also we have Lizzie here, Lizzie Haughton from the Student Union, and she's the Activities and Development Officer. And I understand that she's now on John's subcommittee and the Student Union's getting more and more involved in this area of activity of the university. So welcome to everybody, and maybe I should start off the title as Investment and Divestment. So thank you, Steve. Do you want to start?
I will. Thank you very much, Amanda. Good afternoon, everybody. I should put this in context first as finance director for the university, and point you to a number of things where actually we make investment decisions, and that puts into the sort of holistic view of effectively sustainable investment. I'd point you to the Sustainable Development Goals, the report that came out about 3 months ago, where this reflects all the breadth of research that we do, as well as our procurement policies, etc. Where we're recognised as being world leading on the impact we have and the positive impact we have. And equally, as heading up procurement, we do an awful lot around social responsibility procurement. And I'm a great believer that we all in the room have probably greater impact on companies through our buy decisions than we do through our investment decisions. But that's not to ignore what we do through investment decisions. But actually, as a university that's spending 300 million plus with the supply chain, the impact we can have on them, on their socially responsible behaviour, is very significant, and we pride ourselves on that. However, then this is about, I haven't got the divestment word on the introduction, Amanda, so thank you for opening up that contentious area of issue. But looking at responsible investment in the University of Manchester. And I think it's worth putting this in context of what we're doing here. And we're focused here on the endowments which are managed by the Board of Trustees. So the board has two responsibilities. One is to govern the university and take, endorse the strategy and look at how we perform against the strategy. Equally, they are trustees of the charity itself. And the charity oversees the investment of its endowment portfolio, which is about 230 million. We've got total 250 million under investment. Some of that is university funds where we've left it in there, exposed it to greater risk, so there's greater growth on behalf of our own investments, not just the endowments, which are, if anyone's read the accounts, are separated, and the university can use the income from the endowments for investing in the purpose of that endowment, the benefit that the original donor had. And we look at actually getting about a 6% total return on that, the sort of loose aim on that, and we've been working with the charity commissioners to actually invest the total return, so capital growth as well as income. And we're having some positive discussions there, and the team, part of the finance team, have that joy of working with charity commissioners. And the investments are held in a number of funds, but global equities, diversified growth funds, property funds, and cash. And a lot of the active investments we talk about, and certainly when it comes to divestment, we're talking about global equities. And at the moment, about 60% of our holdings in global equities. Yeah. And we have some restrictions on that. So in terms of governance, and I do, Liz hasn't yet been to investment subcommittee, but as finance director, I am there to advise the trustees on the decisions. So we have a number of advisors there. So the investment subcommittee, which, as Amanda says, John chairs, looks at setting the investment beliefs, looking at, it appoints the advisors and managers, monitors performance, etc. And it reports up to the finance committee for those recommendations. And we have a socially responsible investment policy, which the executive does have a role to help shape. And Nalin Thacker is now the new Vice President for Social Responsibility, has that lead. James Thompson did it before. And we had a very active engagement with the student body and the staff body about 2 years ago to say, right, how should that be shaped? And effectively the Board of Governors then look at that, they approve the social responsible investment policy, they approve the strategies. But all the legwork is really done through the investment subcommittee, which John chairs. So that's the governance process on it. And the decision-making process, and we've just started this process again, sort of a 5-year cycle. So we've just appointed new investment advisors, and they're there to actually look at our policies, advise us of our strategy, our investment strategy. Endowments are there for intergenerational investment benefits. So the endowment is there not just for today's student or today's member of staff, but intergenerational. So when we look at some of the decisions we made about changing from investing in property and perhaps some of that investment in MECD, that we've used some of the funding for that because it's intergenerational. As finance director, with the discussions we're having, use your endowments to benefit a few generations of students, not just one generation of students. But that comes out, so the strategy is there to actually look at that long-term growth. The asset allocation, what's their view of risk, and we discussed that. And then which fund managers should we actually use? So that's the role of the advisor. And the investment subcommittee is there really to put it into implementation through the investment managers, which we approve. And all this is done, the investment subcommittee appoints the investment advisor through our procurement processes. So we do that in open competition, but have a challenging meeting with that. We will, at the stage now, we're looking at the next generation of investment managers. At the moment, we've got 3 lots of investment managers. And then we're looking at areas where we can actually potentially make a bigger difference through individual investments into either some sort of pool funds, which are actually looking at renewables, or really you've got to focus on sustainable growth, because those investment vehicles are there now, which they perhaps weren't a few years ago. So this is not overly complicated, but just, I think all the slides are going to be available anyway, so I'm not going to dwell too long. These are sort of the issues we take into account at the investment subcommittee. Really going from values and beliefs there, which are your own values on investment sort of policies, as well as this sort of social responsibility investment beliefs. Going through there and looking at that whole balance of investment to say, right, what's the best position for us to actually generate the cash flows and the growth that we need to actually meet the original intent of those people who, the donors who made the original investment or endowment to us. And more we take into account the sort of ESG issues, which are really about environment, social responsibility and governance. And this is again on stock market, every stock now tends to have a rating against its ESG ratings. And we're looking at how does the organisation that we're potentially investing in respond to these things. So obviously on the environment, you've got the issues of climate change, pollution, deforestation, resource shortage, etc., where we're actually saying it's got to be willful. We'd rather, anyone who disregards this willfully is not someone you'd want to invest in. Now that's quite a hard-nosed decision, because actually anyone who does that, their stock value will go down. You want somebody who actually is there to stock value to enhance and go up. So in that area we have, some would say, a fairly easy target to go, but there we made decisions to not invest in people who've got fossil fuel companies which have greater exposure than 5% to coal tar sands, etc. And then on society, you're looking at those sort of areas. Again, what are their behaviours around, let's say, child labour? You know, as a university and as anyone who engages with these things, child labour is a regrettable fact of life. So what you're looking at with companies is how are they responding to tackle that? The same with environmental issues. Are they responding and changing their behaviours? Because actually in a lot of parts of this world, if you just turned off child labour, unfortunately, is sometimes the only breadwinner in that household. So you've got to work with companies to change behaviours. And so we're signed on with the UN Principle of Responsible Investment, which actually focuses on engagement and says engage with companies to change behaviours. And if they don't change their behaviours, then perhaps take some other action. And governance issues, which a lot of the moment on ESG, a lot of ratings, we don't invest in anybody, John will talk about it, sort of triple C, which is the worst rating in the class. But a lot of those C's come out because of governance. And you have some very successful companies who would still have a CEO and a chairman in one person, and that would get a poor score on governance. So you've got to look behind some of these governance scores. But again, any good governance and the engagement would be, well, let's change that governance structure in the company so you've got better independence and better control. So that's a quick overview, and I'm going to hand over to John now to say, right, what stage do we go through on that?
Thank you, Steve. Good afternoon, everybody. What a delight to be here. It's a vitally important journey that we're on together, whether you're in the student community or the staff community, and we're probably not going fast enough. So the views and discussion that we have a bit later are all grist to the mill. Just a couple of slides, if I may. Let's just have, responsible investment approaches. If we were at the top of that for our entire investment portfolio in equities, we'd be happy. Positive screening of best-in-class, environmentally and sustainable and socially responsible investment. If we're not there, then at least we should be engaging directly with the companies that are part of our portfolio and trying to influence board decisions about their strategy in relation to, let's now make it linked to fossil fuel investments. If we can't do either of that and we want a big portfolio of equity choice in order to get return for the university, then at least we want to be negatively screening those things like armaments, tobacco, and indeed sort of tar sands and thermal coal deposits as we are doing now. So the challenge in the investment subcommittee is directing through our investment managers, through practical processes, a direction of travel which is moving upwards, and we're making positive steps in the last 2 years in that direction, as I'll show you. The issues with the current situation is if we want to get the maximum return out of our 250 million for the university, and the university needs independent sources of income, we have to have as much choice as possible in terms of our investment. So on the one side, we want a wide range of investment choice simply for fiscal reasons to get a return that is 3 or 4% ahead of inflation if we can get it, etc., to invest in university resources and property and so on, student residences, etc. Or if we're going to limit, at least we should limit to those companies where we've got our investment managers engaging with the management of that company and the board of that company to shift the strategy towards something that gives adequate returns but is also strongly sustainable. And the issue we've got with that is that the investment managers that we use, professional ones like Harris or Investec and others to manage the portfolio on our behalf, have to have a mechanism and a capability in order to do those upper things, either have the diversity of options to invest in, or indeed to have the resources to engage in board meetings in a positive way to influence the company. So we're restricted in our direct ability to drive the strategy we would wish, short of having our own investment management group, a big investment management group, stock picking, but 250 million, to be quite honest with you all, is not a wider, big enough portfolio for us to have our own investment managers. Therefore, we have to work through others. And the question we have to ask on the committee is, once we've set a socially responsible investment strategy, can it be enacted by our managers efficiently, and do they exist? And we can come back to that as a discussion point. We've made progress, and I'm thrilled with this. You'll look at it and you'll say it's bloody slow, etc. But over the 2 years, first of all, our first tasks were getting full transparency to the student body and publishing at least twice a year everything we're invested in, and welcoming letters. I mean, one of the most important letters you wrote to us was Caterpillar. You know, you're invested in Caterpillar and the bulldozers are used in Gaza Strip, etc. And that caused us to go straight back to the investment managers and say, you know, can you engage with Caterpillar? Can you ask them at board level or their CEO why their bulldozers are being used in the Gaza Strip, and do they have control over that? And of course, it turns out that the Caterpillar bulldozers concerned were sold to a second party. The second party modified them with armour plate, etc. And we couldn't truly say it was Caterpillar's, you know, marketing strategy to sell to military cause. So, but keep them coming. Those letters are important because actually we push those straight back to our investment managers to try to, you know, to shift this down a positive track. We, through Gemma's great efforts, we joined the PRI, the global PRI, which rates our investment management capability and performance and the university's overall policies, but it also, PRI signatories include obviously the Church of England at one extreme, and at the other end companies are joining the PRI to demonstrate publicly and independently that they're working on this track. We've, as Steve said, we were unhappy with our previous investment advisors because they weren't as proactive on socially responsible investment as they needed to be, and we've appointed new ones, and we're just in the process of pushing to, we just completed the investment strategy review, but to find new managers. And one of the criteria, which would have been stronger than when we did it 5 years ago, would be their ability to enact University of Manchester socially responsible investment policy. So, what are we trying to do? It's a journey. Have investment managers incorporate ESG factors, move to the positive, to get investments in our portfolio that are seeking to promote low or zero carbon investment. So we are looking to shift at the moment 5 to 10 million into that arena over a step of time. Interestingly enough, when we talk to Morgan Stanley, who are potentially an investment manager in that arena for us, they said that those investments that were made into that sector 5 to 10 years ago have not made adequate returns fiscally, but now they believe there is a very significant opportunity for making highly selective investments in that arena, so the university can balance, on the one hand, getting 4% return above RPI or inflation, and on the other hand, conforming absolutely with our desire to go fully carbon neutral. We've made that step I talked about before. We may, as a result of what Lizzie says and others, want to move forward, move further in the fossil fuel arena and the discussion today. And we want to make sure that we see absolutely quarterly in the ESG reports from our investment managers evidence that they not only engaged with the management of e.g. Shell or BP, but also what the result of that was. And so we are going in a lot greater detail in the meetings, and now we're holding about 4 meetings a year. So it's quite time consuming in order to look through the evidence that our managers are acting on our behalf. The 3 C's criteria, there is broadly a universal rating system beginning to be used by most investment managers, of which sort of AA rating is really good opposite ESG. And as you go down to sort of D's, it's absolutely don't touch them. So we've got a 3C, at least we've established a bottom at the moment. If any company is descending and it touches a 3C rating, it comes back to us immediately and we review whether either they are dealing with the problem to go back up again, or we divest. And it isn't restricted solely to fossil fuels, it's restricted to other ESG voting factors, including, for instance, slavery, corruption, etc. and so on. And as I said, we published the quarterly listing of holdings. I think I've only got one more slide on implementation. we want to move upwards, as I said before, to sustainable opportunities and full ESG application. We're certainly putting more pressure on engagement, and we're moving along that path in a positive manner and trying to take in the view of the student body and the staff body of Manchester. And ideally, we'd like to get to a position, and you'll probably say to yourselves, well, you won't get there for at least a decade, where when we say Manchester has got the European first university for its socially responsible overall policy, for its part of its overall strategy as a university, its investments are completely coherent with that principle for the university. And I would like that to be there personally, thinking about my grandchildren and so on. It's very urgent in some of these arenas, and so it is important for us all to be active. So that's okay for me. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, takes us back to, that's a sort of segue into Lizzie and fossil fuels. So I hope that's helpful. Okay,
Thank you very much.
Nice.
Lizzie, do you want to say a few words? I know you haven't got any slides prepared, but maybe there's some issues that you want to discuss with the audience and with our speakers.
Am I sitting down or should I stand? So I purposefully didn't put any slides together because I didn't feel that I was going to share any new information about the link between finances and sustainability. And also I don't really know the finance terminology that well, so I'm kind of going at it from a student perspective, but also a kind of outsider perspective, and also somebody that works with students and the university as part of the Students' Union. So I also don't want to make it seem like what I'm going to say is targeting any one individual. It's not targeting anyone, it's targeting the institution and its responsibility within this fight against climate breakdown. I do want to, however, make it evident that it's important for these individuals to do more and to say more about this issue. We are not doing enough, we are not doing nearly enough to stop the worst of climate breakdown. It is happening now, and I don't think we should be talking about our grandchildren. We should be talking about the millions of people across the world dying from climate breakdown right now. I just do want to ask you a quick question, Steve, about the investments that we don't have in tobacco companies and the reason for that. Why don't we invest in tobacco companies?
I am on record. The prime reason we don't invest in tobacco companies is because of the work we do on cancer research, and we wouldn't get cancer research funding if we did invest in tobacco companies. So you could say, and I have said it before, it's a fiscal decision. I actually think it's broader than that. So that's a slightly tried finance director's answer, but the fact is, because we care passionately about curing cancer, actually causing something that causes cancer isn't good.
Thank you. So we don't invest in tobacco companies because tobacco obviously causes cancer. That's obviously an individual choice for people, but obviously it's a big issue that came about in the 90s, and most universities don't invest in tobacco companies. Cancer Research UK and the British Heart Foundation do not invest in any companies that do not fund any companies or institutions or organisations that have investments in tobacco companies for the reasons that Steve just said. So I just want to ask then, what about the millions of people across the world dying right now from climate breakdown and ecological breakdown, and the companies that are doing that have a major contribution to that? For example, fossil fuel companies. Why are we not divesting from them? And what about the millions of deaths that are to come because of climate and ecological breakdown, and the 100 million climate refugees that we're going to be facing by 2050 if we don't do something about this? And I do want to point out that these lives are disproportionately the lives of black and brown people across the global south that are being exploited and brutalized by the current global economic system that was created in the West and that is driven by systemic issues such as racism and colonialism. So I don't think that we can any longer tiptoe around these issues as if they don't connect. Climate change and climate breakdown is a race issue, but that's not really what we want to go into right now. I do want to just say that what I'm going to say now is basically some of the arguments that I've heard from from senior members of the university about why we're not divesting from fossil fuel companies. Again, divestment, in my opinion, having been part of the People and Planet Society since my second year at university, campaigning on this issue for now 3 years in this specific university, and also knowing that the Divest campaign has been going since 2012, so that's 7 years on, and we haven't really made much difference. It's not the answer to everything. Divestment from fossil fuel companies isn't the answer to everything. It's not going to solve everything, but it is the first step. And so far, we haven't taken that first step. And that is, for what I'm about to explain, well, there's many reasons. Again, on that issue of everything being interlinked, the ESG investing process system, in my opinion, is greenwashing. If you have a company that rates C in environment and A in social and governance, for example, BP, then you completely ignore that impact that it has on the environment. Just look at the Deepwater Horizon disaster that happened in 2010 because of, well, the link that BP owned that oil rig, but they did fine in governance and social. So that was a massive flaw in the ESG system. But again, it's saying that climate change isn't to do with governance, it's not to do with class, it's not to do with consumerism, it's not to do with capitalism, it's not to do with race, it's not to do with homophobia, it's not to do with transphobia, whatever. It's all interlinked, and it's the systemic changes that we need to address. So I feel like if I could, I would phrase this all in business terms. I can't. I'm not very good at that. I did English language as a degree, and it didn't really get me anywhere. So I do just want to say that we all know about stranded assets, right? Who doesn't know about what a stranded asset is? So basically, as an example, fossil fuels are a stranded asset because on actual market, I don't know if you can help me here, but the market price of, on the market, the value of fossil fuel companies is less than it is on the books, because we know that fossil fuel companies are being phased out because of climate breakdown, because of the fact that they contribute to greenhouse gas emissions, which is increasing our global average temperature, blah, 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 all of that. So the fact that we're investing in these fossil fuel companies is saying that we're investing in something that is going to be completely depreciated before it even actually happened.
That's correct. That's quite correct. That's quite correct.
Okay.
Everything you said.
So again, ignoring the fact that we are treating the university as a business, that's an argument that's gone on since the Thatcher years, and again hasn't really been solved and is still under debate. But ignoring that, we as a university, as a business, are not treating this issue. We are undermining the efficacy of strategy and the health of the university as a business because of things like these stranded assets. So I just want to say that we need to be, like, all of this is great, all of the stuff that you talked about is great, but it's still in the system that is contributing to climate breakdown. It's still kind of perpetuating this capitalism, consumerist culture that we need to get out of. And I think that Manchester has an amazing history of being radical, and we as a university need to be radical in changing this business model. For example, changing the idea that we can base financial benefit on like monetary value to actually the benefit on the environment and the benefit on the communities and the benefit of the people that work in these communities and these organisations and institutions such as the University of Manchester. Again, on that, the university staff are not, this isn't the university's fault, but it's the system, and it's playing into the system, the fact that the university isn't doing anything. The university staff are not going to be immune from climate breakdown, and the most important thing that we can see right now that's going to happen in the next 10 years is food shortages. So we're not looking out for the investments and the future good returns of this university, but we're not looking out for the future of its staff, nor are we looking out for the future of its students, but that's a whole different issue. I kind of just want to wrap up by mentioning a couple of the arguments that I've heard, and they're not direct quotes, they are examples of arguments that I've put into kind of, of arguments against why we're not divesting straight out from fossil fuel companies. And again, I'm not going to name names because I've heard them several times from several different people. So the first is that you're asking us to choose giving students a new and improved library for which they've been asking for years, or to divest from fossil fuels. we're asking, for me to even have been a recipient of that comment is saying that we're going to have a new refurbished library on a planet that is barely able to sustain us in the first place. I'm asking that we as an institution and as many staff members in here, as well as students, take on ourselves to educate others and act out the responsibility of being an educational institution in the first place, to educate the students that wouldn't know about this issue and tell them that the priority here is to give them a future. It's not to give them a future within this university, within the remaining 2, 3, 4 years that they have within this university. It's the remainder of their life on this planet. Again, I come back to the point that we should not be talking about our children and our grandchildren. It is us that are dealing with it right now, and people in the global south that are dealing with it on a much larger scale than we are. So anyway, the next one. It would have a lot of people off my back to go ahead and divest, but it's not on the top of the agenda right now. When is it going to be on the top of your agenda? Another one, we can't divest because of all the other links we have to the fossil fuel industry. It would be seen as hypocritical to divest from fossil fuels. This is £11.3 million we have invested in fossil fuels, and again, it's not the answer to everything, but it is the first step. And that is the step that we are asking you to take to enable us to make those other steps. And again, the last one that I want to say is, at the end of the day, we have to look at getting good returns. And this is exactly the thing that I'm talking about. We cannot any longer look at the system that has put us in this situation in the first place. We need to get out of this system. And there are ways to do it, and there are so many solutions out there, but we're still perpetuating this capitalist culture that is the reason for climate and ecological breakdown. So I just want to... I just do want to end on can I ask a question first? Is that all right? So I'd just like to know, what has the university done in terms of engagement for, not targeting, but can you give some examples of the engagement strategy that the university has done for companies, for example, like BP and Shell? Shall I sit down?
Yeah, great. That's a really good starting question. Thank you, Lizzie.
I think, again, we engage through the investment manager. I think I can't talk about BP and Shell off the top of my head, but I think the one I would cite is Glencore, and Glencore have now stopped. I think they've announced they're not going to do any more, increase their volumes of coal mining. So that's been done through engagement. It's actually they've capped their level. They're not stopped their level, but they've capped their level of mining for coal. So as one of our greatest sort of contributors to climate change. So that's a positive, I think.
I think in terms of Shell and BP, I mean, the step that we've most taken, if you like, in connecting with them is ensuring that a core part of their business change strategy is a meaningful contribution to solar power or sustainable energy. If it was only just a kind of small part, but it's a meaningful part of their overall investment strategy, particularly Shell, etc. Exxon have almost declared the opposite. They're going to stay kind of in the core business that they really understand, because they see the life of their oil and fossil fuel deposits still needed for global energy. So, and there's a number of other examples, but I think that's a starter.
I think we'll we had prior warning that we're going to have to leave, so don't worry.
I'm not stopping
now. No, I'm sure we're all eager for...
Just one other, because where you ended, and when I was talking about trying to shift a proportion of our portfolio to truly, clearly aligned investments, the funds that we're looking at identify water, pollution, energy, and the consequences of climate change in terms of food production as the four pillars of where they would invest, only the areas where they would invest that particular fund. So choosing those gives you a completely viable option to do what you describe. The question is, what magnitude of risks does the university take? And you might say a lot more than it's doing at the moment, etc. And what kind of returns might we get for that investment to conform with the desires that are enshrined in the wills of the endowees, etc. So we are a little bit, yes, you're right, we're constrained a bit by being in a capitalist system to that degree, and also by the government's overall funding for universities has actually been shrinking in real terms, etc. And so sustaining sustaining the entity, which is the responsibility of a trustee, is becoming increasingly difficult. I don't think anybody has ever said we are investing in sort of non-sustainable investments in order to generate income to do a particular thing, like build student residences or change the library. But what we have done with our endowments is to create greater flexibility for those benefactors who gave us the ability to spend their interest, and on highly selective projects like the library, use a small amount of money to contribute to the capital fund for that. But it's by no means related to the overall use of our investments. It can't be, because it's a relatively small return. I mean, if you look at the bond we raised to build the MECD facility and to move out of North Campus, that's well over £300 million. So we don't get anything like that in terms of interest.
I think we might open the floor up a bit.
Yes, please do.
I'm the University Lead for Sustainability. I forgot to introduce myself at the start, as usual. I just want to maybe preempt a few, because I know we're running out of time. But is the university being adventurous enough? Are we following the lead, following people, or are we going to lead people in this? And I know you've made a lot of advances over the last few years that you illustrated, but could we do more? Could we be more adventurous and more in terms of our ecological and ethical investment?
Yeah, we could go.
Could we be?
Liz is right. We could go faster.
Why 5%? Why not 0%? Why can we push ourselves more?
We could go faster, and there has been a heck of a lot of debate about whether or not that actually would make a difference to the companies, and whether it's the full issue of ESG alignment of our investments. So actually, it's the debate that's gone on in the university has slowed us down. The first report, I mean, I commissioned when we reformed the ISC, we commissioned a report from the university, and we said, look, we need an expert view on what's the right position for the university with the things that Lizzie talked about. You know, your BP's got some investment here. You're working on graphene, which can be potentially fantastic sort of membrane in new fuel-efficient cells for energy storage.
But we're too slow. Are we too slow?
And so the net result of that was there wasn't a recommendation either way about the effect of complete divestment. We are moving down the divestment track, and the latest study we hope we're going to get in the next few months, I think, will probably recommend that.
And I think that pace, even into that very positive action to say, right, we want to go into invest into sort of positive things with a positive impact. The returns are only just there now. So actually getting into investing in, well, renewables have been, is one that everyone talks about. But actually when you come out into a sort of saving water or agricultural issues, that the actual getting together the funds are only just there now. And we can't invest in little companies. We need something to be able to package it around us, because we're not big enough to do it that way.
Why isn't the university investing in its own renewable infrastructure?
I mean, the steps it's made, certainly, I mean, I've been a trustee for 9 years, so I retire next year. I have to retire next year. And it has made combined heat and power investments in order to get greater efficiency for the energy investments it made. And it's, some years ago, it's set for its new buildings, which particularly is MECD, and the other new buildings that's come up in between, very high BREEAM standards on insulation. It's not sticking solar panels over all the roofs to go fully sustainable because of the extra capital cost associated with it, but it has been debated, and that's a good question for Diana from Estates about the strategy going forward. So the energy efficiency of MECD will be massively more than the sum total of the Sackville building in the North State. So we have made steps, but we're not hitting our target in terms of our energy usage reduction, which has gone steadily down over the last 5 years. But it's still not on target against our 2020 objectives.
And Emma's not in the room, is she? No. Because we've done some reports through with the Tyndall Institute to look at the challenges that we as an institution need to take in the context of Greater Manchester's target of carbon zero by 2038. And there is a level of investment there, and we've got to think more creatively about that. So it's a live topic. So why haven't we, because it is quite complicated, you're right,
yes,
and actually we've just got to look at that to hit that target. And so Emma's right at another one shaking our...
Yeah.
consciences.
Any other questions?
So the world's kind of at a bit of a crossroads where there's the kind of business as usual that we're currently on that leads to 4 or 5 degrees of warming by the end of the century, or we follow the IPCC report from last year and we try and limit ourselves to 1.5 degrees. If we're still investing in fossil fuels, does that mean we're betting on business as usual? We're betting that over the next few decades fossil fuels are still going to be generating loads of money? And if we're placing the bet on that, does that not mean that it influences our behaviour in trying to make sure we win that bet? If the university is deciding how it's going to buy its purchase its energy, if it switches entirely to renewable, then that's going against where it's invested its money. So, are we placing a bet on continued fossil fuel use? And if we do that, are we going to then try and...
I would say we are definitely not placing a bet on it. You know, you can see the trend, even albeit slow, trend of direction of change to eliminating fossil fuels from our investments. But if you had, conversely, the amount of research the university is supporting in energy efficiency and in energy storage and in energy strategy, it would probably far outstrip the income that we're getting from fossil fuels. So I don't think we're betting in any way for that proportion of our portfolio, which is, even if you take the support companies and the Glencores who've got a proportion in coal and the oil company investments, it's somewhere around 4% of the portfolio, and it's been going down. It's not, you know, we would acknowledge, I think, fully openly that it's not an essential component of the portfolio to get reasonable returns, and therefore we could make the gesture that you talked about clearly, but we want to do it from an intelligent evaluation of the position and not against, we don't mind angering BP. We will tell them what we're doing. We don't like angering Shell. It's got to be part of an overall intelligent position opposite this whole issue of how you get ESG related investments, criteria that will work for investment managers that would allow us to shift the portfolio wholly in that direction.
And I just want to again bring it back into the holistic picture. That I'll cite that again. We as an institution are doing, working on a broad front. So that social responsibility and hitting the sustainable development goals and the research we do there is core to this activity. So I'd echo John. It's not betting against anything. In fact, one of the differences, and none of those quotes were mine that Lizzie used, was actually it's the engagement factor. I passionately believe in engaging, which changes behaviours. And I know I get accused of greenwashing, but we can cite fossil fuel companies who are making that that commercial step into renewables, because they see the stranded assets. So actually they're using their capital to redirect their business. That's effective engagement.
Right, should we question from here, and then you at the back?
So Joe Rees, I'm from Seed. If alternative energy at the University of Manchester is generating more income from our investments into research than our investments in fossil fuels, what financial or ecological shock will cause us to pull our investments out of fossil fuels and just start pushing more money into graphene batteries?
Yeah, that's a really important question, and I'm passionate about it. But if we were to shift our whole 200 million into the graphene spin-outs, for instance, or whatever. Yeah. I mean,
so shifting what we invest in fossil fuels into something else.
Then from a fiscal perspective, we would have to leave the money there, not expect a return until the companies themselves in our capitalist system began to make some profit that they could return to their shareholders. And so the issue we've got is that the really exciting investments in our own spin-outs are viewed too risky for the endowment portfolio to have more than a small proportion in it. And that's the way the university is managing its resources at the moment. But actually, it would be highly desirable, you're right, to take a proportion of the portfolio, and we're making small steps in this direction in the asset allocation changes we're making at the moment, to actually look at our sustainability goals, look at the technologies that we're inventing or we're party to, and to facilitate the early transition of those into products. And so we're looking at the materials portfolio. We're looking at the biologics and biotechnology portfolio particularly, at the moment, and we will continue to look for other opportunities in things like energy integration software and other things. We're not doing an awful lot in direct solar conversion at the moment as a university compared to what's going in America.
Question at the back?
Yeah, I was interested in your response to one of the points that Lizzie made about the ESG system. So at one point I thought you did say if you've got 3 C's, then the issue of divestment is raised.
Yeah, that's right.
Is that the
That's
only
right.
condition under which the issue of divestment is raised? And so the point that she made was if you're C in environment, but A in governance, that your good governance can protect you.
No, there's no. At the moment, we are set up. I mean, and Steve and Gemma can comment. We're set up with our managers such that we have some positive divestment criteria. So we have an armaments positive divestment criteria, a tobacco one, and we have a limited divestment rule opposite tar sands and thermal coal at greater than 5% of the portfolio of the company concerned, etc. And then we have, for all investments, a 3C in a case for divestment. Doesn't matter what business area or what opportunity area you're in, it comes back to us for that decision. But for those companies that are in, obviously we can discuss this, and we discuss this quarterly. Do we raise the bar a little? Or do we actually change the rule and say, please come back to us if actually the only things that's stopping them going into 2Cs is just their governance, because they're damaging in all other areas. But for armaments and tobacco and for the thermal coal thing, etc., that doesn't apply. It's just a negative screen directly.
What level of scrutiny do you have for the endowment investments coming in?
Yeah, I would say very good and probably sector leading. We have a gifts oversight committee which goes into the sources of all our endowments and all our large gifts, which looks at where the money comes from. And I'll say no more than that. Unless you want to, but effectively very rigorous. And I don't know how long it's been in place ever since I've been associated with the university. Before, when I was on the board, I was aware of it. So
I see some of those are historic as well, aren't they?
Yeah, but I'm saying, I don't think it's been going on. A lot of this did come about post was it LSE that took a gift from.
Yes, Libya or somewhere or something like that. I don't know.
Is there an objective rather than subjective view though? I mean, you've got the.
Is there criteria?
Yeah.
We're looking.
I noticed the Coates family were one of the donors, who obviously, their source of funds is gambling, and the problems associated with that. So, what objective criteria do we have?
Well,
they're in the policy, aren't they? But I think Coates predated the policy, wasn't it? Yeah.
The criteria are really, where is that money coming from? One is there can be no conditions associated with an endowment anyway. They can say what they want to do it, but it's got to be pretty well unfettered. We've had some that try to restrict it. I suppose the easiest would be, say, a gender-based restriction, but there could be a religious-based restriction. We wouldn't accept on some of that. But then we are looking at the source of monies and the reputational impact it might have on us. So would we screen somebody out who had made their money from, let's say, a fossil fuel company? No, we wouldn't. And we look at the sort of country of source as well. Is it an area where we're quite open to trade with that company or that country of source? And if it's okay, we'd say yes, we're okay on that. So it's majority we pass through, but we do screen some out. And ideally, with anyone who's in DDR, we know before we're approached, which is normally a long-term relationship, and we tend to say, well, don't pursue it because we're not happy.
So I think we've got time for one more question. Nobody else? The lady at the back, last question.
Yeah, you're talking about reputation, and I'm really interested in the fact that Manchester has the Tyndall Centre, which is a world-leading climate change body, and I would suggest that they would recommend that divestment from fossil fuels is a good move for any university to take, And it seems to me that by not divesting, when other universities have divested, that actually it's antithetical to the University of Manchester's reputation, and that to hold true to that reputation, you should actually be listening to the Tyndall Centre and take advice from them on your finances and divest.
But there again, we take advice from all sorts of people, and there's an awful lot. So UNPRI, Principles of Responsible Investment, are about engagement. We actually have a bigger impact through our procurement policies. Where do we buy our own fuel from, or where do we shop? Through our procurement policies to engage with these companies. So again, we have to take advice from a broad church and consider that advice.
I think she was really more implicating a reputational risk and reputation at University of Manchester. I think Lizzie wants to step. Did you want to say something quickly, Lizzie?
No, just it was not totally related to that. I just the answers that we've heard are still within the system that has put us in the situation in the first place, and I still don't see any. I mean, you've said that we can go faster, but I still don't see any evidence of actually breaking out of that system. And to me, that just screams the fact that we are looking out for the long-term growth of the future students and not of the future of its students, of this university's students, or of the staff members. It's looking out for getting more students in the future, but not where they go after, and not what the planet looks like after that. So don't know if that's not really a question. But.
I think that'll be a really good place to stop, actually, Lizzie. I'll let you have the last word for today. I thank you, the speakers, for coming along, and I know this discussion could go on forever. We have sustainability champions, we have lots of events, so please come along and engage and let us know your views. But thank you very much for the speakers.